Unless there's another.
Okay, it's recording.
All right.
I can see you.
You record.
I did. We'll just be cut off. Let's see.
That looks like it's focused.
Go look and see.
It's blue as
Maybe
wind.
something you know, like- Oh my God! It was pouring rain in town.
Is it?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, it's raining a little bit out here.
It's just barely
Downpoured.
Yeah, it was
I
downpour.
had
barely
to
here.
borrow Ron Ellison's umbrella. Jackie walked me in the car.
Do you know who sings this?
I did a little sample for you.
Oh, is this it? Okay, cool.
Just a little sample. Time for Thinking Real Estate.
Stressful week.
Be with Lord Dwyer Schlecke. Bill Schlecke is back.
He was here last week.
Oh, was he?
Was he?
Yeah.
I can't keep
How
track.
short?
I know.
I can't keep track of it.
I'm invisible.
Here
No,
one way.
that you are not.
All right.
Trust me on that one. So, can we start out with the Landlord Conference that the city's sponsoring on, or putting on, I shouldn't say sponsoring, putting on Friday, May 8th, this Friday, from 9 to 2:30. We have, topics such as money-saving maintenance tips.
Wait, let's start over.
Why?
What's going on this week?
We have the Landlord Conference on Friday at City Hall from 9 to 2:30, and some of the topics are money-saving maintenance tips. Jim from Home Depot and Steve Baldwin from Baldwin Building will be a panel talking about that. What are the City of Jackson regulations? And I'm not sure who from the city will be talking about that one.
Somebody from the building department.
Yes. Basic legal updates.
Who's doing that one?
Bill Schlechte,
I am.
the one and
Or when
only.
were you gonna tell me?
And then we have reducing utility costs. I have a vendor, or one of the people who do the energy audits for Consumers Energy coming for that. Top 10 city violations and how to correct them. Another city employee from the third floor will be doing that.
Okay.
Exit strategies for rental property owners. And I have a panel of CPA from Bond and Company, and Clyde Malden talking about 1031 exchanges. And then we have
Wow.
someone from the Fair Housing Center of Southeastern Michigan will be our main speaker during lunch, and lunch is free. We have, after that, from 12:40 to 2, we have 9 roundtable topics. Evictions, going to court, which will be Jeff Fraunfelker at that table. Should you be an LLC? We have the CPA from Bond and Company at that table. Lease clauses, we have Bill Schlechte at
Again,
that one.
okay.
Legal aid
This is the
and
first I'm hearing this, Greg.
legal aid and mediation program will be there. Erica Zimney, I think is her last name. Qualifying tenants, that will be Shane Laporte and Gay Wynn from, Shane now works for the city, and Gay Wynn
So who knew?
is Wynn Brokerage.
Shane works for the city?
Yeah, he's one of our inspectors.
Who knew?
Who knew? And then we
Breaking news.
Breaking news. Property insurance, I'm not sure who is there for that. Pest problems with Dave Laughlin from Aardvark. And then loan options will be CP Federal Credit Union. I think Jeff Thomas is going to do that one. Thomason. And then closing remarks.
What time's this start?
Starts at 9 and goes till 2:30, includes lunch, and it's free.
Where is it?
So if you're thinking about getting into the rental business, or you're a landlord, this would be a great opportunity. You can call my office, or you can call my office at 780-3800, or more easily go to activatejacksonmi.com. activatejacksonmi.com and fill in the form. So we just need a head count for lunch.
This is up in the city,
It's gonna-
the council room?
Yeah, that's where registration is, and then one of the breakout sessions will be on the 10th floor, but primarily everything's on the 2nd floor, City Hall.
Very good. That's this Thursday?
This Friday,
This Friday?
May
All right, I'll try to be there.
Okay. You're penciled in?
Yeah, all she does is she points.
2, 3
wow.
times.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay. That's the way this
8th. Yeah,
works.
no, I'm excited about it, and the city's really excited to offer this. So, speaking of topics, then, I signed a lease today with a couple, adorable couple.
Did you qualify?
And we don't know when they're moving in because their house is for sale. Any recommendations on how to handle that in the lease?
Huh?
Because we don't have a beginning date. We don't, so I couldn't take really any money.
How can you sign
Well,
a
you
lease and you
can.
don't have a
Well, I was
date?
getting commitment to hold the apartment for them.
Sure,
But-
you could get a fee to hold the apartment, just to hold it, and then your lease says it's to start no later than a particular date. You can actually take the security deposit if you want right now, because it's a lease, it just has I won't say a nebulous start time, but it has a start time which is indefinite, but must happen by a date certain. That's easy to do. You can just draft it in that fashion. So what's the so this is a vacant apartment right now?
Mm-hmm.
And so you're holding it for how long?
Well,
Because
we'll
I mean,
get-
go
go
ahead.
ahead. No, you
No, I
go.
was gonna say, I mean, we're pretty full up, I think, in terms of,
We are.
have tenants,
we only
yeah.
have 2 units
Right.
available.
right, so you don't wanna keep it off the market for any significant period of time.
Well, they're clients, and I'm selling their
Right.
house, and
All right, so what's the period of time that you're gonna hold it?
I don't know. Well, I'm gonna get their house sold, so max 2 months probably.
Yeah, okay, well, there's nothing wrong with that. You can
Right.
provide that it's to start no later than 2 months, and then are you charging anything to hold it, or are you just holding it? Okay, the radio audience can't pick up a nod of the head. This is like in a deposition where I have to tell the witness to answer
Not at
orally.
no,
Pick it
no.
up
I hadn't
on
really
the-
thought
on
it.
the internet.
My
Well, that
problem.
way you'd have to do it, but for those people who just listen,
Right.
okay, nods of the head really don't come across the
No.
radio. Go ahead.
Arrgh. Jeez. Anyhow, I hadn't experienced this, so I don't really have a policy. I will put a policy in place as a result of today, though. And no, to answer your question, I'm not charging them anything to hold it, but I will in the future. How's that?
Well, you want me to give a little bit of legal advice to them?
Yeah.
Sure.
And that is, if there is no consideration for an agreement, like in this case, the agreement to hold the apartment for up to 2 months, if there's no consideration for it, it's simply a gratuitous promise and it's not enforceable by them. So it really should read in the lease, for and in consideration of the sum of $1 paid by the lessee to the lessor. Lessor agrees to hold the property for a period up to 2 months, something like that, so that they have some assurance that you will do it, or some other consideration. I mean, you could actually do it, I think, for and in consideration of the agreement to lease, that they will be leasing it and moving in before the end of 2 months. That would be sufficient consideration. But you raise a very interesting legal issue, and that is, it's like an offer to purchase. When somebody says, I'm making an offer to purchase, this offer remains open and irrevocable until midnight on May 15, 2015, and then the next day the purchaser finds another property they like better, so they send a notice out and says, oh, gee, by the way, we're not keeping this offer open and irrevocable till May 15. They're entitled to revoke it because there was no consideration to support the promise to keep it open and irrevocable for that period of time. It's just a little nuance in contract law. In order to be able to enforce a promise, you have to give some consideration for it. It doesn't have to be money. It can be a promise. But gotta be something.
Well, I'm making notes.
You
as
find
speak.
out something interesting every day. You
And
live with me, don't you?
I do.
Okay.
It's unbelievable.
Mm-hmm. One of the
If
advantages
everybody
of
could be
being
so
married.
lucky. Hence, we're doing the show. So now other people are lucky enough to
Yeah,
find
to
out
get that
something.
information. Yeah,
from
I think,
you.
because what happens, sellers particularly get surprised, or when the seller makes a counteroffer, they say this counteroffer is only available to be accepted until midnight on whatever the date is, and then the seller gets a better offer, and so they send out a new notice that says, hey, I'm revoking that. The purchaser says, well, wait a second, you told me it would be open and irrevocable till May 15. What are you doing? Look, my lawyer says I don't have to honor that promise because you didn't pay me anything for it. All it's got to be is $1 or some promise, and that's sufficient consideration.
And vice versa, right?
And vice versa, yeah.
So if they find something else,
Well,
If the buyer
let's-
made that offer and
They're
said,
out.
yeah,
Well, let's go back to the lease. Let's say they gave us,
so if there was $1, then
One-
they couldn't get out?
they couldn't revoke the offer. Like this one, they offered a lease. We'll lease it to you as long as you move in no later than May, what's today, the 4th? No later than July 4, 2015, right? And so now, if we make that promise as
so
a
you have to
land...
have beginning and end dates. You have to have an expiration date in order to be for.
Yeah, but I have to have
Or
definite...
time frame.
Yeah, for any contract, I've got to have definite terms so we know what we're talking about. I've got to identify the parties, I've got to have a term, I've got to identify the consideration, I've got to identify the object of the contract, those sorts of things. But in this particular example, where you say to a prospective tenant, okay, I'll hold this apartment available for you for the next 2 months, as a landlord, there's nothing that stops you from revoking that particular commitment unless the tenant actually makes a promise in return. Says, okay, if you hold it for me for 2 months, then I agree I will start my lease no later than July 4, 2015. That's a promise which is in consideration for
Okay,
the
so
landlord's
they give us
promise.
$1 to hold it
Or they
until
say
July,
40.
just let me ask my question, July 5th or whatever, and they back out. Their house doesn't sell, they decide where their house, they decide to take their house off the market, whatever the reason is. Can I go after them for the rent that was promised within the lease? What can I go after them
No,
for?
not in that circumstance, because you haven't, in that agreement, they haven't agreed to lease. They simply agreed to pay you $1 for your commitment to hold the apartment for 2 months. If that's the agreement, then no, you can't enforce it. If the agreement is, I will hold this apartment available for you for the next 2 months, in consideration for you agreeing that you will start your lease no later than 2 months from today, and they don't start the lease within the 2 months, then you can go after the tenant for...
So it has to be worded correctly.
Yes, correct. You have to provide that the consideration from the tenant is that they will go ahead and enter into possession and follow through on the lease. The other thing that landlords don't understand is, particularly in a market where you have lots of tenants, let's suppose that you have that agreement with a tenant, and the tenant's supposed to move in on June 1. You sign the lease, everything's all set, it's a 1-year lease. They don't move in. So you as the landlord now go after the tenant for the rent that you would have made had they rented that apartment. Where it is a residential lease, and even in a commercial lease, I take this position as well, the landlord has a duty to mitigate the landlord's damages by going out and trying to find another tenant. You can't simply sit on
right.
that apartment. So, and that's, again, these are all things that are going to be part of this seminar that apparently I'm going to be a participant in on Friday. These are the things that you talk about.
And it will be fascinating.
Well, I like to think so, but not everybody who listens to my diatribe believes that it's as fascinating as I.
Anybody close to you at this moment in time?
Informative.
Yes, extremely informative.
All right. I got another transaction where we had a bottom line deal. The buyer goes to the lender. Lender does their research and finds out that the buyer has a short sale. Buyer doesn't qualify for the mortgage until
I
October.
think it's 3 years after the short
Well,
sale. I think
in
that's
this point,
Fannie
it's
Mae's. Okay,
It's short sale was a while ago.
all right.
So in this case, he doesn't qualify for the mortgage until October. Buyer comes back to my seller, wants my seller to lease the house to him. We find out that the lender's requirements is that he has to lease the property for 6 months. What would your advice be?
The first order of business for the landlord, for the seller / prospective landlord, is do your own credit check to verify that this person has good credit, because not only are you entering into a purchase agreement, you're entering into a lease in which you're expecting monthly payments, a stream of payments over that 6 months while this property is being held.
Can you ask the buyer to ask the lender to release the information that the lender has with regard to the buyer's qualifications?
Well, you can ask the lender, but the lender under the bank privacy laws will not release it without the written consent.
Well, that's what I
of
just
the
said. Can
borrower.
you ask the buyer to sign a release to the lender to
Yeah, you have to find out from the lender what it will require in order to release the information. If it will release the information upon execution by the buyer of a release, then you get their form and have the buyer issue the consent or the release, consent to the release of information, give it to the bank so they can get that information. Because the bank has done its own credit check.
And would you continue to do a credit check, your own credit check, in light of the fact that the bank has done one? Because theirs have got to be extremely thorough, I would assume.
Think so, but I don't know, and it's cheap for us to do it's inexpensive for us as landlords to, and prospective sellers to do a credit check. So it's like belt and suspenders. I would do my own credit check to see if the bank missed something.
Okay, and
Because remember, they're not checking with prior landlords. One of the questions that you're asking as a landlord is, who are your prior landlords? How long did you
well,
live
they
there,
are
so-
getting verification that they paid their rent. I
Well,
would assume.
yeah, I mean, again, I don't know what information the bank is getting and how it may differ from the credit checks, credit reports that we get through TLO.
Right.
We use a service called TLO.
Well, I use a different service, but, and then the buyer has to be in the property now for 6 months, so, which means if the buyer got in the property on July 1, the closing wouldn't be until January 1,
Right?
right? Of next year,
Right.
instead of October. If you were advising that seller, that's basically taking that house off the market for 6 months. And can you write a lease purchase agreement where the buyer has to purchase the property?
Yeah, and you can write it so that the maximum term will be until, you won't do January 1 because nobody's closing anything on January 1. So you might do January 15 or something like that, that it must close that the term of the lease expires no later than January 15. But the lease will terminate earlier based upon when the purchaser qualifies for the mortgage, so that you can tie the lease to the sale itself.
So I can lease a property with so would it be a purchase agreement with a possession agreement, which the possession agreement includes a lease? Or would it be a lease with a purchase agreement?
Well, it won't be a lease with a purchase agreement, because that essentially is like a lease with an option. I would do a separate purchase agreement and a separate lease, and have first a cross default provision and then a provision which ties the one to the other.
Any recommendations for protecting the seller, who is my client?
Again, the first order of business is getting the credit information to make certain that they're gonna get the stream of payments over that 6-month period. Second, making sure that they've got a well-drafted purchase agreement that provides it must close no later than the date certain. And then adequate earnest money deposit, so if the purchaser fails to close,
Non-refundable?
non-refundable earnest money deposit, having nothing to do with the lease and the security deposit. This has to do with the purchase agreement.
Right.
And then a well-drafted lease that says, hey, look, max term is January 15th. And it terminates earlier upon closing of the sale and purchase. And it would anyway, but under a legal doctrine called merger. You can't, if I'm a tenant and I buy the property, the lease is now abrogated. It doesn't exist anymore. The lease merges into the ownership that I now have. I'd be the landlord and I'd be the tenant, so the lease no longer exists once I close.
Okay. All right, very nice.
Well,
He's knowledgeable.
see you Friday.
Isn't he smart?
Yeah.
No comment.
Yeah.
Did I? Okay, well anyhow, so let's talk about houses that I've got.
Yeah.
3420, I guess I can look it up here. 3420 Lookout Circle is a fabulous house. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths. I think it's slightly over 2,000 square feet, full basement, beautiful backyard with an enclosed porch. It is listed for $169,900. Lookout Circle is that subdivision that's between Vroman Road and Horton Road. Very nice area.
Mm-hmm.
Well priced, move-in ready, hardwood floors under the carpet on the second floor. So come take a look at that. And then 502 Orange Street is an adorable, I'm gonna call it a bungalow, 1-story with a basement, nice big kitchen, deck, shared driveway for $54,900. And then 3310 West Morale is back on the market right now for $139,900. That sits on little over 4.5 acres. just east of Robinson Road, so it's a great location. It's 3 bedrooms, 1.5 bath, one owner, they built it, and it is just over 1,400 square feet with a full basement. And I've got others, so you can call me at 780-3800. You can go to thinkingrealestate.com. And then the Landlord Conference is Friday. You can go to activatejacksonmi.com. And I have a neighborhood meeting on Thursday at 6:30, which I've heard you advertising. Thank
I
you.
heard that in the news today.
And that is at the Emmanuel Lutheran Church on the corner of Brown and Michigan. We're going to talk budget.
Phone number?
780-3800.
Call.
Won't see you next Monday. I'm in court. Matter of fact, I won't see you for over a month. Huh?
Okay,